Hello. Now, today, I'm delighted to bring you the results of the 2024 HSBC Hurun Education Global High Schools list. So this is a ranking of the best high schools in the world. We managed to find just under 180 of these high schools in the world. And the way I thought I'd structure it today is first about the why. Why do I think a list could be of use to you? And then I thought about the how we actually did it, what's the methodology that we used, and then perhaps some of the results that are of interest to you today. So why did I do a list of this type? Well, we work with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, and many of them are more and more global in their vision. And so, especially in a country like China or in India, where actually people are no longer just looking at their own schools, but they're looking to send their kids more and more to schools all around the world. Now, which are the best high schools in the world? And so that's the question that I suppose we're answering. So we're targeting possibly families who are thinking beyond their own country and thinking of sending their children all around the world. We're targeting also perhaps teachers who are looking to work in the best schools in the world, and then also we're looking at the university admissions officers to give them a better understanding of some of the schools, high schools in the world. So I suppose that's the why. It's taken a long time to come up with the methodology. This is coming onto the how. And it took me, to be honest, almost 7 years to come up with the methodology in the beginning. And the challenge really was, how do you rank high schools? So I suppose what I did is I first determined that we're only going to look at independent schools, i.e. non-state schools. And we're going to only look at schools that are full-time with physical campuses. So a lot of these new online schools, they're not in our scope. And then the idea was, well, what do parents really want from a school? So the first one was, I suppose they want to have their children, when they graduate from school, get into a good university. So that was driving our main methodology and results. So we looked at 60% of this list is looking at where the children go on to when they graduate from the high school. So we don't look at A-levels or SAPs or any of the exam results at all. We only look at university destinations. That makes up 60% of the methodology. But of course, school is much more than about just where you go on to university afterwards. It's about a whole education. And part of the whole education is your co-curricular activities, the CCAs. So that includes your sports, your music, your art, and that's so important because it helps build teamwork, leadership skills, a whole of sort of life skills, communication skills that are often outside of the classroom. And so this makes up our second one. It's the 20% of our total results, and it looks at how the quality of the facilities and the quality of the training, the staff that are actually the software, if you like, of the CCA programs. And the third one, we called it the reputation of the school, but predominantly it's driven by the alumni of that school who are alive today and what they've gone on to achieve in society, either in the world of science or research or politics or sports or whatever it is. So we look at the quality of the alumni. So those are our three criteria of how we went about it. We scoured the world for all the top independent schools in the world, and we came up with a list of more than 600 or 700 schools. And then we applied this methodology, and that's sort of given us the results for the 2024 HSBC Hurun Education Global High Schools list. So what are the results? Well, a few things that really stood out for me. One is that the average age of these schools is over 200 years. So they have a history of 200 years. Some of the oldest schools, there's two with a history of 1,000 years. Wow, that's pretty significant. They're actually both in the UK. And when we looked at where these schools are based, well, they come only from 11 countries. Number one was the US, and number two was the UK. Between them, they made up almost 85, 90% of the total roughly 180 schools that made the list. And then number three, surprisingly enough, was China. So China had 13 schools that made the list this year, one less than last year, but still more than the other 8 countries on the list combined. So more than number 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to number 11 combined, just to give you sort of a flavor as to where the countries are. When we looked at the cities, well, it was the nearest big cities for the schools was London and New York. They were the ones that absolutely stood out. Then you got other cities like Boston, you got Shanghai, I think, was number 5, actually on a par with Oxford as well. So just to give you a flavor of that. We looked at whether they're single-sex schools or co-ed schools. The trend is co-ed. So about 2/3 of the schools on the list, just under 70% are actually co-ed schools. About 1/3 are single-sex schools. And again, this is really surprised me, is that of the single-sex schools, again, roughly speaking, 60-70% were girls, and only 30-40% are boys' schools. So I thought it was the other way around before I did this list, but in fact, single-sex girls' schools are still much more than single-sex boys' schools. We also looked at whether they are boarding schools or day schools, and we found, roughly speaking, 50% are full day schools and 50% are boarding or have some sort of boarding facilities. So that sort of gives you an idea as to the type of schools that made the list, and so on and so forth. So this year's results, well, and as I said, we had in the top 10, it was predominantly all UK and US, basically London and New York, mainly day schools, some that had some boarding as well. Westminster School in London was number 1 actually for the 2nd year running. You know, they send about 40% of their 200 graduates each year to either Oxbridge or to basically top 10 US universities in the world. So that just sort of gives you a flavor. Number 2 is a New York-based school called the Dalton School. They jumped up 5 places this year and made it to number 2. Number 3 was St. Paul's School in London, and so on and so forth. That sort of go on with the actual list itself. I suppose, in summary, we're really proud to do this list. It takes an enormous amount of work. I hope you, as the user of this list, can get value from it. Maybe it will give you some inspiration. But at the end of the day, you need to be really careful with any list. A list is only as good as the methodology. And specifically, in terms of schools, a list of schools can hopefully inspire, maybe give you some new thinking. But when you're choosing a school for your child, you've got to make sure it's the right fit. It's not necessarily the best school, because the best is an objective one. It's the best for your child. So please always bear that in mind. Thank you so much for watching, and total pleasure. Do please give me your feedback, and I'm very proud of this list. Like I said, it's taken a lot of energy, a lot of work. But I think it's extremely meaningful, and I hope that you think that the same too. Thank you very much.